Alina Whitmore stood frozen in the middle of the dining room as 12 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Her fiancé, Nathaniel Cross, had just spoken words that would change everything. "No one wants a broken woman," he said, loud enough for the entire table to hear. The room went silent. Alina's hand trembled as she touched the scar along her cheek, the same scar that had appeared after the accident 6 months ago, the accident that had also left her with a permanent limp. She had once been Nathaniel's pride, the woman he introduced with a proud smile at every gathering. Now she was an embarrassment he wanted to hide. Alina had known something was wrong for weeks. Nathaniel's calls had grown shorter. His visits had become rare. He avoided looking at her when they walked together, as if her limp reminded him of something he wished to forget. She had told herself it was stress from his growing business, that things would return to normal once he adjusted. But sitting there, surrounded by his family, hearing him dismiss her in front of everyone, she understood the truth. He was not adjusting. He was leaving, and he wanted the world to believe it was because of her, not him. Her fingers found the ring on her hand, the ring he had given her with so much promise 2 years earlier. She slid it off slowly, placed it on the table in front of him, and stood up. Her legs were unsteady, but her voice was not. "I may be broken in your eyes," she said, looking directly at him, "but I will never let you decide my worth again." She walked out of the house without looking back, leaving behind gasps and whispers she no longer cared to hear. The night air outside was cold, and for a moment, Alina simply stood on the sidewalk, unsure of where to go. She had given up her small apartment when she moved in with Nathaniel's family, believing their future was secure. Now she had nothing but a suitcase of clothes and a heart full of anger and grief. She called the only person she trusted completely, her older cousin, Margaret, who lived 2 towns away and worked as a librarian. Margaret answered on the second ring and told her to come immediately, no questions needed. The drive to Margaret's home felt endless. Alina stared out the window, replaying the dinner over and over, hearing Nathaniel's cruel words echo in her mind. She thought about the years she had spent supporting his ambitions, encouraging him during his hardest moments, believing they were building something permanent together. All of it had crumbled in a single sentence. When she finally arrived, Margaret opened the door without a word and simply pulled her into a tight embrace. Alina broke down completely, releasing months of pain she had been holding inside. That night, lying awake in Margaret's guest room, Alina made a quiet promise to herself. She would rebuild her life, not for Nathaniel's approval, but for her own peace. She had no idea that a chance meeting, still weeks away, would soon change the direction of her life entirely. 3 weeks later, Alina found work as a bookkeeper for a small countryside estate, a position Margaret had helped arrange through an old friend. She needed steady income, and more than that, she needed purpose. The work was quiet, the routine simple, and for the first time since the breakup, Alina felt a small sense of control returning to her life. She did not yet know that the owner of the neighboring estate, a reserved and thoughtful man named Alexander Ravenswood, would soon walk into her days and challenge everything she believed about her own worth. Alexander Ravenswood noticed the new bookkeeper on his neighbor's estate before he ever spoke to her. He saw her walking along the garden path each morning, moving carefully but with quiet determination, never once seeking sympathy from those who watched her. Alexander was a man known throughout the county for his sharp intelligence and his distance from social gatherings. He preferred numbers, land records, and solitude over crowded ballrooms and empty conversation. But something about the calm focus in Alina's eyes made him curious enough to break his usual routine. Their first real conversation happened by accident. Alina had been reviewing a set of financial records when she noticed an error in the neighboring estate's shared accounts, an error that belonged to Alexander's own ledger. She sent a polite note requesting a correction. Instead of a written reply, Alexander appeared at the estate office himself, ledger in hand, ready to discuss the mistake directly. Alina expected irritation. Instead, she found a man who listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and thanked her for catching what his own accountant had missed. From that point, Small interactions became regular. Alexander began finding reasons to consult Alina on matters that had little to do with actual bookkeeping. He asked her opinion on tenant agreements, on repairs needed for the old mill, on decisions that affected the people living on his land. Alina was surprised by how much he valued her perspective, not as a formality, but as something he genuinely needed. No one had asked for her opinion so consistently in a very long time. Alina tried to keep their meetings strictly professional. She had built walls around herself since the night Nathaniel humiliated her, and she was not ready to lower them for anyone, especially not a duke whose world seemed impossibly far from her own. Yet she noticed that Alexander never glanced at her scar with pity, never slowed his pace to accommodate her limp in a way that felt like charity. He simply treated her the way he treated everyone else, with plain respect. One afternoon, while reviewing storm damage reports together, a sudden rain forced them to take shelter in the old stone barn near the property line. Trapped there for nearly an hour, they talked about things unrelated to work for the first time. Alexander spoke about the loneliness of managing an estate alone since his parents passed away. Alina, cautiously, shared pieces of her past, though she avoided mentioning Nathaniel directly. She admitted only that she had learned not to trust easily anymore. Alexander listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he said something she did not expect. He told her that strength was not measured by how unbroken a person appeared, but by how they continued moving forward despite everything working against them. Alina did not respond right away. She simply looked at him, surprised that a man she barely knew had understood something about her that Nathaniel, after years together, had never grasped. As the rain slowed and the sky cleared, they walked back toward the estate in silence, though it was a comfortable silence, not an awkward one. Alina told herself this was nothing more than a growing friendship, a professional respect between two people who happened to share difficult histories. But that night, lying awake in her small room, she found herself thinking about their conversation far longer than she intended, wondering what it might mean, and whether she was ready to find out. Word of the growing friendship between Alina and Alexander spread quickly through the county, as such things always do in small communities. Some neighbors whispered that the Duke had finally found someone worthy of his attention. Others were less kind, suggesting that Alina had somehow planned her position at the estate to gain access to his wealth and title. Alina heard these rumors secondhand, through Margaret, who warned her gently that people could be cruel when they did not understand a situation. The gossip eventually reached Nathaniel. Hearing that the woman he had discarded was now spending time with a respected duke wounded his pride in a way he could not ignore. He arrived unannounced at the estate one afternoon, claiming he wanted to apologize for his harsh words months earlier. Alina agreed to a brief conversation, mostly out of curiosity rather than any lingering affection. Nathaniel's apology, however, quickly turned into an attempt to convince her that Alexander's interest was temporary, that a man of his standing would never seriously consider someone with her history. Alina listened calmly, then reminded Nathaniel that his opinion no longer held any power over her decisions. She asked him to leave, and though he hesitated, he eventually did. The encounter left her shaken, not because she believed his words, but because old wounds do not disappear overnight, even when a person appears strong on the surface. That evening, doubt crept into her thoughts. She began to wonder whether Alexander truly saw her as an equal, or whether his kindness was simply a temporary curiosity that would eventually fade. Alina responded to this doubt the way she often did, by pulling away. She became more distant during their meetings, keeping conversations strictly limited to estate matters. Alexander noticed the change immediately. He asked her directly if something had happened, and though she initially denied it, his patience eventually led her to admit that Nathaniel had visited, and that his words had unsettled her more than she wished to admit. Rather than dismissing her concerns, Alexander addressed them seriously. He told her that he understood how difficult it must be to trust again after being treated so poorly, and he assured her that his intentions were not driven by fascination or pity. He explained that what drew him to her was her intelligence, her honesty, and the quiet strength she carried even during difficult moments. He made it clear that he had no interest in the opinions of people who judged her worth, based on scars or rumors. Despite his reassurance, Alina remained cautious. She explained that she needed time to be certain of her own feelings before allowing herself to trust someone completely again. Alexander respected this without pressure, telling her that he was willing to wait as long as necessary because he valued her comfort over his own impatience. In the weeks that followed, their bond continued to grow, strengthened rather than weakened by the challenges they had faced. Alina began to notice a shift within herself as well, a slow return of confidence she thought she had lost forever. She started attending small local gatherings again, speaking openly about her recovery, and refusing to hide behind embarrassment for things that were never her fault. Alexander often accompanied her, standing quietly beside her, never overshadowing her voice but always present when she needed support. By the end of that season, whispers about their friendship had shifted in tone. People began to notice the genuine respect between them, and even the harshest critics found it difficult to deny that Alina seemed happier and more confident than she had been in a very long time. Months passed, and the relationship between Alina and Alexander deepened into something neither of them could deny any longer. What had started as professional respect had grown into genuine affection, built slowly through honesty rather than grand gestures. Alexander no longer saw Alina as simply his neighbor's bookkeeper. He saw her as someone whose presence had changed the quiet, isolated life he once accepted as normal. One evening, Alexander invited Alina to walk through the estate gardens after her work was finished. The gardens were peaceful, filled with the last light of early evening. There was no large gathering, no audience, no elaborate setting designed to impress. Alexander wanted the moment to be simple and honest, just as their relationship had been from the beginning. As they walked, Alexander spoke about how much his life had changed since meeting her. He admitted that he had spent years avoiding close relationships, believing that his responsibilities left no room for personal connection. Alina had changed that belief entirely. He told her that he admired not despite her scars, but because of the strength that carried her through everything she had endured. He said that he did not view her as broken, and never had, but as someone whose resilience inspired him daily. Alina listened, her heart pounding, unsure of where the conversation was leading, though a part of her already suspected. Alexander stopped walking, turned to face her directly, and told her that he wished to spend his life with her, not out of pity, not out of curiosity, but because she had become the person he trusted most in the world. He asked for her hand in marriage, his voice steady and sincere, free of any performance or expectation. For a moment, Alina said nothing. She thought about the night Nathaniel had humiliated her, the words that once made her believe she was unworthy of love. She thought about the months of rebuilding herself, learning to stand again, both physically and emotionally. She thought about how far she had come, not because someone rescued her, but because she had refused to give up on herself. Alexander's proposal was not a rescue either. It was an invitation to build something together as equals. Alina accepted, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. She told him that she wanted him to understand clearly that she was not accepting out of gratitude or relief, but because she genuinely believed in the life they could build together. Alexander smiled, telling her that was exactly the answer he hoped to hear. News of the engagement spread quickly through the county, reaching far beyond the small circle who already knew of their friendship. Reactions varied widely. Many were genuinely happy, admiring the quiet dignity Alina had shown throughout her recovery. Others remained skeptical, unable to understand how a duke could choose someone with her history over the many other women eager for his attention. Alina, however, no longer concerned herself with those opinions. She had learned that her worth was never something others were entitled to decide. As preparations for the engagement began, Alina felt a sense of peace she had not experienced in years. She was no longer the woman defined by cruel words spoken at a dinner table. She was becoming someone new, someone stronger, standing beside a man who valued her exactly as she was. News of Alina's engagement to Alexander eventually reached Nathaniel, and it struck him harder than he expected. He had assumed, after their earlier encounter, that the relationship between Alina and the Duke would fade away quietly. Instead, it had grown into something public and permanent. Unable to accept this outcome, Nathaniel appeared once more, this time at a small community gathering where Alina and Alexander were present among friends and neighbors. He approached Alina directly, attempting once again to plant doubt, suggesting that she was making a mistake, that people would always see her differently, that a title could not erase what he called her flaws. This time, Alina did not allow herself to feel small. She responded calmly in front of everyone present, telling him that his words no longer held any weight in her life. She reminded him that his cruelty had once broken her spirit temporarily, but it had never defined her true worth. She thanked him, unexpectedly, for showing her exactly the kind of person she never wanted to build a future with. Alexander stood quietly beside her throughout the exchange, offering silent support without stepping in to speak for her. He understood that this moment belonged to Alina alone, a chance for her to reclaim her voice completely. When she finished speaking, Nathaniel had nothing left to say. He left the gathering without another word, and from that day, he no longer attempted to interfere in her life. In the months that followed, Alina settled into her new role, not as a woman defined by tragedy, but as a respected partner within the estate and the wider community. She continued assisting with financial matters, now working alongside Alexander as an equal decision-maker rather than simply an employee. Tenants and neighbors who once viewed her with pity began seeking her guidance and advice, recognizing her intelligence and fairness. Alina often reflected on how much her life had changed since that painful night at the dinner table. She realized that Nathaniel's cruel words, though deeply hurtful at the time, had ultimately pushed her toward a path she never expected. She did not view Alexander as someone who had rescued her from brokenness. Instead, she understood that she had rebuilt herself long before he entered her life, and that his role was simply to recognize and support the strength she already carried within her. On the day of their wedding, held in the same gardens where Alexander had proposed, Alina stood confidently, without hiding her scar, without adjusting her walk to appear different than she was. She had learned that true partnership was never about being unbroken, but about being seen and valued exactly as she was, flaws and strength together. As the ceremony concluded, and the small crowd of genuine friends and family celebrated around them, Alina allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection. She thought about the woman she had been in that dining room months earlier, humiliated and uncertain of her future. She realized that woman had not disappeared, but had grown into someone far stronger, someone who no longer needed anyone else's approval to understand her own worth. Her story was no longer about what she had lost, but about everything she had built for herself, one determined step at a time.